intro for you and your background, and then we'll jump in here.
Yeah, sure. So Morgan Chemij, I oversee acquisition and retention marketing for HP's direct business. And so that effectively is the customers that would be coming to purchase directly from HP versus purchasing through a Best Buy, Walmart, Amazon, et cetera. And then my team's also responsible for global UX and SEO. HP operates direct businesses in 27 countries around the world. So it's really interesting and innovative, some of the stuff that we're working on and getting that global perspective adds a unique slice to things.
So Morgan and I were chatting. Feels like yesterday about sort of the summit and some of the topics that people have been covering. And I think Morgan, one of the places where we really, I think, both aligned is that the last 24 to 36 months have been pretty insane. And one of the questions I'd asked you was, what are the biggest shifts you've seen? What are the biggest changes that you guys have dealt with over at HP? And what's been surprising, and where have you guys had the most success in adapting to what has been a challenging new environment for everybody?
Yeah, so I mean, I think holistically, one of the pieces that I think, and I don't think it's unique to us, I think it's endemic of anybody working in marketing or just holistically, the level of speed to market and agility that I think businesses have been asked to embrace is probably one of the biggest game changers. I mean, working in technology, we do work at a relatively quick pace, but I think if I look back to late February, mid March, when all this kind of started to tip off, I remember my team runs CRM and email, and I remember looking at the creative, and we had March Madness creative, and basketballs and hoops and all sorts of great stuff. And then, kind of at the drop of a hat, as it were, we really had to kind of turn that down and realistically think about at that point a lot of the March Madness stuff, they were starting to talk about canceling it, etc. And kids were getting sent home from school. A lot of employers were starting to close the doors, and so as a brand, I think HP recognized, like, hey, what are the changes that we're seeing in the ecosystem. And so you started to see work from home becoming one of the very first trends, and then learn from home. And then really what we saw, surprisingly, was game from home. It's actually everything from home, but game from home. And so it was really interesting. Actually, you can look at whether it's the query volume or the category of product that we sell. It was really interesting to see, how quickly people are like, oh, we need another laptop for our children because they're not going to be able to share anymore. Oh, I'm so used to having a monitor at the office, I need a monitor at home. Oh, I can't print at the office anymore, I need a printer for home. And so it really kind of revolutionized not only our go-to-market insofar as the marketing communications that we were pushing out, but also as we looked at supply chain and what products we wanted to ramp up manufacturing on, et cetera. And so kind of as a broader ecosystem, I think we were forced to become very agile, very quick. And I think the other piece is, I think marketing, oftentimes, as much as we try and have marketing be bi-directional and personalized one-to-one, I think a lot of brands still do one-to-many, and it's not bi-directional. It's kind of the brand talking to the customer. And I think this was one of those moments where we started to really embrace customer feedback and really poring over I mean, you can imagine, just given our size, the amount of emails that we get on a daily basis from customers, whether it's like, hey, I can't find this ink for my printer that's a little bit older, or hey, I need help with this. And so to be able to be really reactive and proactive, as it were, understanding what customers were looking for and how we could facilitate better. So really interesting time. I think as terrible as the world outside is these days, being a marketer, it's really influential. And I can imagine there'll be many great college courses that are kind of created based upon what we're all learning about marketing over the last 12 months.
Well, it's interesting too, because I sort of group the brands that we see as falling into three buckets, right? There's brands whose businesses accelerated tremendously on the back of this. Zoom, great example. Peloton, great example. And these are businesses where it's just like, the pandemic represented just an absolute state change and an order of magnitude increase. And like the success that they're having, and their marketing teams are trying to figure out how to just handle and respond to that. Good problems to have. There's another class of company, airlines, cruise companies, fitness companies. We work with folks like Equinox and Planet Fitness. Those folks, it's a devastating moment. Like there's really nothing you can do as a marketer to like get people to go to the gym when they're going to potentially catch coronavirus there. And really you're just trying to be responsible and let them know when the gym's going to be open. And then there are brands in the middle. I sort of see you guys as in the middle. And I think most brands kind of fall there, which is to say brands that could realize incremental value for their customers and differentiate based on the sensitivity with which they handle the problem, the thoughtfulness that they bring to it, the ways that they make adjustments to their products and services, or maybe not, right? They drop the ball, they don't step forward, they don't embrace transformation in a way that makes sense, and they're left looking regressive or insensitive or any other number of unfortunate adjectives. I'm curious, when you look around the brand landscape, where were you looking at? Who were you looking at for inspiration? Who do you think has handled the last period particularly well?
I mean, I think honestly, some of the companies that you mentioned, I think Zoom in particular. I mean, HP obviously has a great rapport with them. I think about how they've really kind of transformed a lot of what we do. And there's obviously other companies that play in this space as well. But I feel like because most of us we're probably used to using Zoom or Blue Jeans or WebEx, whatever, for the last couple of years as video became more dominant, and particularly those of us who have teams that don't all sit in the same location, it started to kind of carry beyond work to family and to home. And I think it really enabled connections at a scale that maybe didn't previously exist. And so, like I'm an Android user, so I can't FaceTime. And so like there's challenges like that when you want to get everybody together. My sister just had her 50th birthday. And so like getting everybody together around the country with like a single piece of technology that everybody understands, that's as easy as click. I think that's been pretty transformational. And people who you usually visit 2 or 3 times a year, and just being able to spend a little bit of time Zooming with them, colleagues, whatever the case may be. And so I think that Zoom in particular has done a really phenomenal job. I think if you were to look more broadly, I think we've as a family have started to do kind of a lot more of the food delivery options. And I think there's so many different things to stress about right now. And so I think when you look at, Blue Apron and some of the other companies there that have just made it easy and made it less stressful. And it's like, frankly, I hate to say it, I didn't used to cook with my wife. But like now, like everything comes, it's really easy. We're never missing an ingredient. And so now like we spend time listening to NPR and cooking dinner together. And I think, the companies that have figured out how to bring people closer together and make life better in an otherwise challenging time, I think those are the brands that I really kind of look up to. And I'd be remiss in not mentioning Disney Plus, frankly, because I think they just really have knocked it out of the park. Talk about bringing families together. I think they've done a phenomenal job with their catalog, releasing Mulan and other things that had been kind of in the vault that they're waiting for release, putting it out there to Disney Plus customers, and just their original programming. They've done a phenomenal job. Their growth story is incredible. And, there's so many different things to stream these days, but I feel like they've done a really phenomenal job across different axes, obviously, each one of the 3 of them.
Yeah, my wife works at Disney Plus. We're a big Disney Plus household. They finally get it for free now, which is nice.
Oh.
That was actually not the case until this month.
Wow.
But no, it's super interesting, and I think one of the things that's really kept coming up for me in these types of conversations, and a lot of the brands that you mentioned, I think, do this well, is that I think that the pandemic has sort of forced us to stop separating marketing from service. So many of the channels that were historically service, now we also have to recruit to deliver marketing messages, and vice versa. Where previously we might view a channel like Instagram as a place for mostly telling the story of our brand and putting out inspirational messaging and that sort of thing. People are going there to engage, directly and to ask difficult questions about the product that they may have purchased. Similarly, folks are looking to find ways to build that deeper customer relationship and to uncover what the customer needs and wants, in what are traditionally more cursory service interactions. And I think the brands that have been able to kind of like make that feel normal, like the customer's just trying to have a conversation with you. I happen to be on Instagram. I got a problem with my laptop. Like, hey, HP, like, can you help me out? Not that people ever have issues with HP laptops, but if they did, and similarly, it's like, I happen to be on the phone with you, looking to figure out what's wrong with my phone. But that may be a great time to talk to me about, like, hey, because of the pandemic, you're spending more time, on your phone, your minutes are low or your data's low, like, and it doesn't feel so smarmy as it used to if it's delivered correctly, because people understand that the spaces where they used to go for those types of interactions have collapsed. I'm curious how you guys think about this. We talked a bit about this yesterday, the sort of intersections of service and marketing interactions, where it feels good, where it doesn't feel good. Curious how you guys have thought about that, and sort of what's worked and what hasn't.
Yeah, it's been kind of an interesting evolution. So we started working with third party called Invoca effectively to understand the influence of the marketing that we were running, when ultimately we've got people that would pick up the phone and call the call center. And obviously, that call center exists to support customers if they have needs, and then for existing customers, and then obviously to bring in new customers. And we weren't sure, based on the money that we're spending in paid search, display, et cetera, what we're driving to the website, how much of that traffic ultimately goes into the call center, and then tying it back to conversion, et cetera. And so as all of this is happening, obviously we're seeing an increase in call volume pursuant to kind of what you just highlighted: more people calling, more people using chat online, you name it, just more brand interaction. And so what we started to do is, Invoca has this technology that effectively uses natural speech processing. So when somebody calls up, we get a better insight into, if you're calling for support, what exact kind of issue are you looking at? And then over time, when you think about, like, within 30 days, things start to fit into nice buckets. And generally, we feel like we do a good job listening to things that are posted in our support forums and creating content. And we've got a huge proactive base of people that are already, replying, a lot of volunteers that act in that capacity. But as a brand, we're starting to get kind of unique questions that are coming in through the call center. And we're taking a lot of that data and a lot of those insights, and we're actually starting to funnel it back into things like our chatbot, so that the chatbot can answer more questions and, serve you right then and there, as opposed to you having to pick up the phone and call. We have a section of the site called Tech Takes, and that's we've probably written about 1,000 plus short, medium, long form content articles. Everything from increasing your frame rate to making your laptop battery last longer, et cetera. But we're taking some of these requests that are coming back, and we're using it to actually inform the content that we're creating, for SEO and just for content in general. And then the other piece is, we can actually go and look at, if you think about the individual sales agent, coaching a sales agent to make them better, and have them better identify customers' needs and kind of help them through the purchase journey. If you think historically, that would be somebody listening in on the call, kind of muted. Now with this technology, instead of having one person there, technology allows you to do that at scale. And for every single call that comes in, the calls that close, what's working, the calls that don't close, what's not working, and to really give that custom feedback at the individual call agent level. And so really around, like, using some of the newer technology that exists out there, and everything from helping it to inform training, helping it to inform the content that we're putting on site, helping to make our chat bots and other technology better. It's really interesting. And I think it goes back to what I mentioned earlier, with just agility and kind of thinking through new solutions and innovation.
How did you guys approach that process of making those things feel good when they weren't an area of excellence or expertise necessarily for you previously? I mean, I think there's a lot of heartburn and anxiety about making those big investments in things like chatbots. And maybe you guys had already spent significant time there. I mean, certainly, you know, IT and computing is a space that's been a little bit more progressive just based on the ordering cycle and the nature of those products. But I'm curious, like, was it a bit of faith? Did you guys have strategies for skilling up in those areas? Like, I'm curious how that process looked.
So I think there's two different components. I think there's like a brand comfort and then there's a user comfort. And I think they have to kind of, the timing has to coincide with both, right? I think if you look at things like, I mean, up until not that long ago, like my dad wasn't willing to put his credit card into a computer to purchase things online. But because of COVID, it was like the only way to do things. And so eventually he folded. And that's a pretty common phenomenon actually that like has happened over the last 12 months. I think if you think of things like chatbot and utilization of chatbots, like 3 or 4 years ago, nobody would have even known that they were on with the chatbot, right? Like it wasn't necessarily called out as clearly. It would say, talk to Jane, right? And nobody would say that Jane's a chatbot, being run in the cloud, et cetera, et cetera. But now people see it and they generally know it's a chatbot or you announce it's a chatbot. And those people who know the ins and outs say live operator and Jane will automatically put you in touch with somebody live if you need to speak with somebody live. But I think it's really like the level of consumer adoption. And so I think when we started to see, and that it's not necessarily purely COVID, but I think over time we've seen things like chatbots become more the commonplace. And so, while there is still a little bit of internal selling that has to go on, to prioritize a chatbot deployment versus some other kind of IT deployment, I think you also parallel it with, rising costs, right? Like it costs money to have people in a call center, whether it's, in the Philippines or in India or in the US, right? Like that all costs real dollars. And I think particularly now when customers are expecting they're expecting to have product within 2 days, right? Because of kind of that Amazon effect. Like I think big brands are having to figure out, okay, where do we deploy technology to drive efficiency? And then we take those savings and we redeploy them somewhere else. And so in this instance, you're deploying technology to generate efficiency and you're taking the savings and you're redeploying it to your supply chain operations to get customers what they need faster. And so generally it's a win-win. Obviously, as a brand, we'll always have people staffed at the phones. That's not going away anytime soon. But if we can help customers get what they need faster, and frankly, like we also looked at a lot of the use cases for chatbots, the frequency of like people just wanting to track a package. Why would you sit on hold for a couple minutes and talk to somebody and read the tracking number and skip a digit and have to read it to them again? And so I think there was just a myriad of different elements that kind of have to come together. But I think certainly having the right people believe in it across your technology team, your overall operations team, your strategy team. There's a little bit of selling involved. I'm not going to lie, but I think we generally try moving at the pace or a little bit faster than what we see our industry peers doing. And it's nice being in a technology business that's been here for 80 plus years. We've seen a lot of companies come and go in those times, and we're still standing strong. So it seems like it's working, whatever the approach is.
So, and it's interesting, like as you're telling that story, obviously you're at a brand innovator summit, and you're a marketer by trade in some respects, but also your remit is much broader than that. It seems to encompass UX, design, product thinking, which, to your point about HP being progressive, is progressive. We don't see a lot of that out there. We encourage it. Certainly, I think there's huge elisions and sort of a realignment happening around responsibilities. Folks are starting to recognize that their marketing is, in many cases, a product. It's not actually marketing in the classic sense of like we're throwing a bunch of ads out there. It's like a sustained brand image that must be managed like a product, and the flows of users through those assets are very product-like in their way. How do you think about running your team and structuring your team given the diversity of skills and folks on it? And how do you bring out the best of that cross-functional mandate while reducing confusion or some of the challenges that come with bringing those things together?
Yeah, I mean, I think I would say that our organization structurally, within my team anyway, is set up. While we do operate across different categories, with print and laptops and accessories, et cetera, rather than taking that approach, we still have things generally lined up by marketing function. And so, we've got the BI team, we've got the CRM team, and then, you've got your paid search, your organic search, affiliate marketing, display marketing, et cetera. But I will say one of the really interesting things I took on UX about a year and a half ago is bringing that UX thinking in. Whether it's things like the ad creative itself, it's not always like how can we change things within the actual landing environment? It's everything, that kind of UX way of thinking. I mean, it even applies to like when we do PowerPoints now. People are thinking more about like the vertical and the horizontal logic and everything flowing together nicely, and more images, less text. And so it's been really inspirational insofar as kind of having that lens and having it apply to so many different aspects of what we do. I think we pull them in a lot more than we potentially used to, and I think it's been relatively transformational. I mean, if I think of something like SEO, for example, right? Going back to that tech takes, and we've got 1,000+ articles we've created. We just reskin them because the UX team's like, hey, you guys are creating great content, but there's some basics here that if you move this and, made the search box a little bit bigger, et cetera, you would see improved page engagement. You'd see improved page engagement via lower bounce rate, increased time on site, et cetera, et cetera. And so, we A/B tested the templates, and lo and behold, the new and improved UX design won. And so everybody wins in those instances. And so I think it is a little bit of a provocative setup, Josh. But I think, if you've got the right people thinking the right ways, you can drive a lot of success by doing things that maybe would buck the trend, as it were. And so it's a really interesting use case.
Totally. I mean, it's one of these things where everybody knows that like the skill sets that made sense 20 years ago are not the same skill sets that help you win today by themselves. In many cases, people also don't sort of attribute enough value to those things because it's very easy to focus on what's new and shiny. But what's funny is that like businesses still organize themselves like they did 20 years ago in many cases. Not always. We're seeing a lot of folks move to tribal models or cross-functional models, which is great. I think the challenge with those things is to not make them feel performative, to give real accountability shifts as opposed to just like, oh, we hang out with those guys from the data team or from the UX team or from the CRM team, every, week or two, and we have some shared projects together. But really, I still report up into my VP of marketing, and that's all I care about. It's challenging to make them feel real without rebuilding your business from the ground up, which we all know is not going to happen. Tragically, there's a lot of value in the retaining of the things that have worked in the past. So, it's interesting to sort of hear your take on old versus new and how you guys are integrating those things. I think it would also be interesting to hear the way that you guys think about bringing in technology to support those things. So, we spoke a bit about chatbots, and I thought that was an illustrative example. What do you view as like the sort of table stakes maturity, vis-a-vis, customer tech today, for you guys? And to be more specific, like, I have a lot of conversations with people that are like, oh, like there's all this new tech out there, and there's machine learning, and there's predictive stuff, and like, I need to buy every new thing that's out there, or I need to just make sure that I buy every new module that Salesforce releases, or I only want to work with small vendors, because they have, particular expertise and they're not selling me this bloatware, you know, and so it becomes very challenging to understand like what the right way is to orient to like looking for new technology in the general case, and then picking it and building a stack in the more specific case. Maybe to start off, how do you think about finding new technology, whether it's from your existing partners or from from new partners? Do you start with a problem? Do you sort of keep your eyes on trade press? Like, you go to conferences like this? Like, what have been the ways that you've managed to find and unlock new capabilities?
Yeah, I think a lot of it. So there's a couple different avenues, right? There's the classic like boss's boss get some solicitation, and so works its way down to you to go ahead and run it down, right? And to take the 30-minute call just to say you checked the box, right? So nobody necessarily likes those, but every once in a while you'll find a winner, right? Um, there's the random solicitations that you get directly that are like, oh, that could be interesting. Where I would say we've probably had more of the success has actually been through like, what's the problem you're trying to solve for? Right? Like, I don't need a solution that's going to solve for a problem I didn't know I had. I mean, it's great, but obviously, if I didn't know I had it, how big of a problem was it, right? So it's so like, case in point, because we're a manufacturer, prices change. We need to maintain price parity. We need to have map pricing. And so as a result of that, sometimes we'll send an email, and the price that was in the email when we created it and when we sent it is not necessarily the same as the price on the website, that we can change a little bit more quickly, right? Like we can make changes to the website. They're relatively fast, as you can imagine. But an email, once it's already in your inbox, like, oh, well, how am I going to fix that? And I don't want to deliver a bad customer experience because there was a change in price, or we promoted something heavily in a TV campaign or whatever the case may be. We sold out of it. And so to that end, I was like, what can we do that's going to allow us to change the content of an email after it hits somebody's inbox? And so obviously through a little bit of Google searching and refining my search, and finally nailed it. I found a couple different companies that proclaimed that they could do this. And then ultimately we settled on one called Movable Ink that's really does phenomenal, kind of best in class, where after that email is already in your inbox, when you open it for the first time or the second time or the third time, every time you open it, a pixel fires and it can go ahead and refresh constant instantaneously. And so if you think about, a product that was out of stock, I can swap a new product in. The price has gone down. We can go ahead and modify the price. If you think about use case from like where's my product now, like from a shipping item, instead of the customer having to kind of dig through their emails to find the latest ship notification, they can just open that original email and it'll automatically show that FedEx truck moving along closer to your house. And so, use cases like that ultimately save us a lot of time, because we were spending, the day the email had to deploy, they had to go and recode. And even though it's just a price change, you still have to recode it. You still have to go ahead and maybe delay the launch by a few hours, whatever the case may be. And so the cost of doing something like that versus having technology where you can go and modify things in real time, and kind of deliver that optimal user experience. And so I think more often than not, it's the team holistically recognizes, hey, there's an opportunity or a problem. How do we go ahead and solve for it? And so that was a necessity is the mother of all invention. I'd say necessity is the mother of all vendor selection. Anyway, that's how we do it. So what should every company have? I mean, that's a tough one. For me, I would say like an attribution solution that everybody buys into and believes, and everybody knows how much to attribute to display, because that's one of the ones that comes up a lot. But I would say like a really strong attribution solution is probably one of my top items that I think any company needs to have. And I think frankly, like a really solid CRM platform, holistically, that can connect all the pieces together. Obviously, with where we're going with customer data, we're kind of in this unique space, and so I think, as with most other big brands, we're using Salesforce, and they do a phenomenal job. And through their acquisition, whether it's Datorama or MuleSoft or whatever the case may be, like they keep acquiring companies that kind of fit a lot of our evolving needs. And so if you look at it like that, I mean, I think the other piece is just having a couple of very strong strategic partners. And we'll go away. Like we don't always buy what Salesforce is offering. Like Movable Ink was not a Salesforce product, for example. Even though they offer similar technology, like you should still go for the best in class solution. But I think if you've got, 2 or 3 really strong strategic partners that understand your business, are willing to work with you on price, and really willing to put some skin into the game, I think it's much better than having this ecosystem of 20 different platforms from 20 different vendors and 20 different client success teams. So I'm probably a little bit of a, when it makes sense to have it consolidated, like don't fear consolidation, but by the same token, don't put all of your eggs in one basket. There are some, not everything is truly one size fits all.
And once you have that ecosystem, so you've made your big investments, you've got your strategic partners, how do you think about managing it? Do you guys primarily work through agencies? Do you have so for your Salesforce deployment, do you guys have like a heavyweight sort of service contract on top of that? Do you have internal expertise? Is it a blend? Like what looks good to you?
So we actually I've been at HP about 5 years now. I think about a year and a half in, I was just looking at our agency fee structure, and the CRM structure seemed like we were spending a little bit more than we needed to, and so we moved from a 30 to 40 person agency team with 3 people in house to an exclusive in-house team. So we insourced the whole thing, and now it's still a very lean model, but we eliminated a considerable amount of waste and 7-figure savings by bringing it all in house. And we use the technology we understand the technology. And so I think, and that's not going to work for everything, right? Like not every channel. I think any brand that says, "Oh, we do everything in house," or "We outsource everything," that's not the right way to think about it. I think you really have to figure out where is it worth really investing in having the subject matter expertise in house and owning the whole thing, versus like where is it okay to pay a little bit of a premium to have an agency do some of this work for you. And so, yeah, I mean, I would say for us, we probably are about 25% agency and about 75% in-house when I think about all of our different marketing channels. And then I think the other beauty of that is like you're able to like bring up best in class talent, and they're able to transition from one part of the organization to another part of the organization. And that obviously eliminates churn and helps with employee retention and employee engagement, which is obviously critical these days.
Totally. I'm going to open it up here in a second for any questions from the audience. So if you want to send those in, I'll make sure to add them. But while we wait for folks to sort of chime in, one other question I had. So you mentioned attribution, which is always one of the most challenging issues facing marketers. Attribution solutions that everybody believes, I believe, is exactly what you said, which is always the hard part. How do you guys approach it?
I think it took a lot of selling internally, and then it took a fair share of testing. Honestly, we did some go dark tests with text ads, product listing ads, to see, for example, like, okay, like is SEO undercounted or overcounted? And so we would literally like, I think the test that we ran over the course of 6 weeks to eliminate a lot of the things that you can see insofar as seasonality. And we had entire days we would just go completely dark on text ads. You had PLAs and SEO live, and then we would turn off PLAs, and you'd have text ads and SEO live, and then you turned off PLAs and text ads, and only SEO was live. And so over the course of 6 weeks, we were able to really garner data to establish the overall weighting that each of these channels should really have, and to understand them. And then if you think about something like display, your standard kind of incrementality test, Smokey the Bear, Red Cross, PSA versus traditional display ads, and your holdback group. And so we've done a lot of testing, and so we've got a lot of the data that backs up how we arrived at where we are today. And I think as organizations are increasingly data driven, you need to have the data to back up the story. Being the loudest guy in the room doesn't work anymore at most companies.
No, in fact, it's often really bad. People think you're trying to hide something. Yeah, attribution, particularly when it comes to paid, is really, really challenging. We've seen just like so many vendors fall down, particularly in a world now where the walled gardens, really make it challenging to understand true attribution. For lots of reasons. They want you to do that reporting within their platform. They don't want you to think about comparing platforms. And they just generally want to protect their data assets. Can't blame them for it, but it becomes really hard, to sort of do that black box, logarithmic regression analysis, without actual data, or without real data. And so you just end up with like a lot of false equivalency. I mean, I think Facebook is still, coming out with like more evidence that they knew and were knowingly misleading customers about their ad performance when people had just been pumping money into that ecosystem, with certain assumptions about ROI. And like, obviously, at the end of the day, the only data you can trust is the data you own, fully. And even then, there are huge issues with that. But all of us have to work in this landscape of like relative data confidence. Like, do we agree that this particular third-party data source is accurate enough? We all understand that we're not going to send emails on the back of third-party data because we know that there are questions around it, but we're willing to use it for ad targeting because we see lift. So it's also this really interesting question around like, what is the right way to attribute? What is the right way to leverage insight? And like, where is there opportunity for incrementality without risk? Where is the risk marginal but good enough? Where is the risk, too great? It's and that's also, that question's also evolving, right? Like, we're seeing some of the regulatory work that's being done around CCPA and GDPR, incremental to what's already been done. And the world is going to change. Cookieless world is an interesting one for many businesses. So, do you have what you would call properly like a data strategy? Like, do you think about it in those terms? Is it mostly an application? Like, who's responsible for that? Particularly given the interdisciplinary nature of your role, I'm wondering if there's somebody who looks after that at your company.
So we're fortunate to have a relatively large marketing arm holistically, and so there is a team that's responsible for that. I mean, you've got everything from data privacy and compliance, down to overall data strategy, kind of holistically. We've got that, and then specifically within my team, the BI team really helps us, with audience selection and who we go after, how we go after them. Look, at the end of the day, I think, there's like this metaphor around like crawl, walk, run, right? And I think for a while, HP and I think a lot of other brands had kind of been at like this nice pace. Like I'd say maybe we weren't running, we were kind of like nice calm jog, doing okay. But I think, with all the changes that have come about with CCPA and obviously GDPR, and the different solutions, whether it's, Flash Talking has their own tag, LiveRamp has theirs, Google has Flock or Turtle Dove. Like a lot of companies are back to walk, because I think we're having to, recalibrate. And even if you have best in class technology and best in class people, this ecosystem is still relatively, evolutionary. And so I think it's going to be a little while. I think come back to me with that question in a year and, maybe 6 months, and, I'll have a more solid answer for you.
Got it. Okay, so any questions from the audience? Just conscious of time, and I know we got started a little early, so I don't know if the conference is running early more broadly. So, okay, well, not seeing any. So absent, additional questions. Morgan, what are other things that are sort of top of mind for you right now as you're thinking about planning out 2021? Are you feeling bullish on the year? Do you have particular things that you're really focused on after a lot of capacity building last year? Like what's top of mind?
Yeah, I mean, I think if we look at like our overall customer flow, I think where there was definitely a really high need for technology, and I think there still is, right? But I think if you look at that transitional period, from March through July, the first stimulus check came in. Um, People have been buying technology at kind of a breakneck pace, right? Like I said, like all these people who only had one laptop in the house now have two. I had to buy two new computers for my kids because they're homeschooling. People who hadn't had a printer at home, and so I think for us, there's probably a few different elements that as a brand we're looking more closely at. I think, one of the big ones is around subscription. I spoke to Blue Apron earlier, but I think, the subscription model is one that I think more and more people are more comfortable with. Not having to necessarily go out. And even when things get back to normal, like I think people are going to have a new value for their time and their social interactions, and they're not necessarily going to want to go to the store to buy stuff. And so I think subscription. So we've got something called Instant Ink, and so the printer talks to HP, and we know when you're running low on ink. And for we've got different tiers, but for $5 a month, for example, you never have to worry about running out of ink ever again, which I think now is kind of critical. Like you don't want to have to go to Office Depot, or wait a day or two to get something delivered, or even with Instacart, wait a couple hours, to get something delivered. And so I think that type of technology where you can have something before you even know you need it, is important. So I think subscription is big. I think going back to all the new customers that came in over the last year or so, I think, having a really well honed, uh, retention strategy, and part of that's email, part of that's loyalty. I think that, for HP and for other brands is obviously starting to become, even more important now than ever. And I think it's challenging for an industry like PCs where there's not, I mean, with the exception of Apple, I don't think there's a ton of loyalty in the PC industry. Unfortunately, it's kind of akin to, again, Apple. When you talk about phones, you're either an Android person or an Apple person. And if you're an Android person, it varies by country. Whether you're on a Samsung or a Google Pixel or whatever the case may be. And so I think that loyalty component, is really critical as well. So I'd say those would probably be the areas where I think there's a lot of opportunity, and we're going to continue to kind of focus in. I think, we'll be launching new subscription products, to kind of capitalize on that. I think because of, again, Disney Plus and, some of these other, I mean, had Netflix. Did you know Netflix still actually had a disc service? I was kind of mind blown when I read that. But we started getting hooked on these subscription services. I mean, if you think back to when we were younger, AOL and Prodigy, but like certainly in recent years, the Netflix of the world that got people comfortable spending, and then obviously cell phones, and now it's practically everything. And so I think, as a brand, whether it's HP or others, just being able to adapt to customer purchase patterns and how customers have changed how they interact with brands and what their expectations are. And I think, a good subscription model enables you to kind of capitalize on that. So anyway.
Yeah. Last question from the audience. Any predictions for 2021 overall for the industry? Like where you think, and I think industry sort of marketing more broadly, like how you're seeing the messaging and the orientation of the customer evolve?
I think we've seen influencers have always been a thing, right? What I think we're starting to see with like Instagram and Facebook and the social platforms in general, allowing influencers to make a lot of their content more shoppable, I think is really gonna. Social commerce has existed in one form or another for a while, but I think, when you take influencers and social commerce and kind of put them together to the point where, somebody can go ahead and post something on Instagram and it's actually shoppable now, where you can actually just go ahead, you see something you like, the influencer does a post, you like it, you can just go ahead and purchase in feed, right within Instagram. And, on the back end, HP's getting that order data, and we're going ahead and fulfilling it. And to the end customer, it's totally a seamless process, right? It benefits the customer, it benefits the influencer, it benefits the brand. And so I do think that we will probably see the true rise of social commerce. It's kind of like QR codes, like they've been around since 2008, but like now I'm kind of seeing them and using them on a much more frequent basis. I just installed the Ring, I scanned the QR code with my phone, it saved me a bunch of steps. I was at somebody's house recently and I was sharing their Wi-Fi via QR code as opposed to typing it all in. And so all of those types of components. So I think there's a lot of evolution, but for me, I think that social commerce is really starting to come into its own. And I think the brands that are able to adapt to it and have the right product fit are going to be very successful. I see Isabella's joined us, which means we're getting kicked off.
Exactly.
All right.
I'm the manual cue. Well, thank you both so much for joining. Anything else, Josh or Morgan, you want to say to wrap up? I don't want to cut you guys short at all.
No.
No, thanks for the opportunity.
Yeah, of course. Well, thank you guys so much for joining. We just have one session left actually today. So I'm thrilled to welcome those speakers. We are joined by